Hey everybody, and welcome to Townscaper. Now this is a little game that was developed by Oskar Stålberg and released in early access on Steam a few days ago. And according to Oskar himself, it's not really a game, but more so just a toy, which I think I'll agree with, because there isn't really any objective to this, and there's not a lot of gameplay either. Really the only thing that you do here is you click on the screen, either the left mouse button to build stuff and the right mouse button to delete stuff. There are no options, and as you can see, the UI is very simple. You just click and the game kind of algorithmically builds stuff. And so this is why it's more of a toy than a game. You don't even have that much control over what you're building. It's just really satisfying to build stuff and see the animations happening and see especially how the game algorithmically tries to figure out what it is you're trying to build and adds these details and flourishes that just make everything look so charming with very little effort. So as you can see, I just built two building spaces here and it creates this small bridge. And then on top of this, we have a house. Now, because I have the red color selected here on the left, these are really the only thing that you have control over. It builds a red house, but then the binoculars that you see over here, or the planter, that's completely random. Honestly, I have no effect on exactly what the game builds there. And as I build a little bit more, you can see the house stays the same, but we get this extra street level on the ground floor. And if I add another house block, then the house becomes a bit bigger. And add it on top of this, and we just have a very small house with a tower. And as you can see, it just already looks really cool. And I think that's the one thing that I like most about this game. It just works so well as a therapeutic little city builder because you don't really have to put much thought or effort into it. Things just look charming by virtue of the art style of the game and how well it can figure out what you're trying to build. That said, there are certain rules though, I think the first of which I've already revealed, that is, if you build anything in the water, it always creates this sort of base level streetscape, and you can build on this, but you'll still have this foundation of grey stone, so that's one thing that you can't change. Another thing is, if you build towers, the game actually automatically creates spires. So as you can see over here, because the house here actually has this building on the side, it doesn't get a tower, or a spire if you will. Ooh, and we got some birds on the roof as well. That's really nice. Once your city grows enough, you'll get a lot of birds flying about. At the moment, there aren't any people or animations in this sense, but you do get birds. But yeah, because this is a building block of 2 blocks high, we get a little spire here. And another thing that's interesting to note is if you put 2 of these next to each other and you put a bridge in the middle, you get this. And of course, we can also add something on top of that and make it into this kind of tower. Oh, and sometimes you get these really interesting details that you can't really, necessarily think of, but that the game fills in, like these lines with clothing on it here. That's really cool. But yeah, I'm not going to do too much else to this village. Another thing that I just want to show off is if you have 2 buildings of different colors next to each other, it does separate the buildings. So as you can see, we kind of get this separate little house here, and if I put this here, it's a completely separate building, which is because this one connects to these because it's on a different height, but because this is just a separate standalone little block, it turns into its own house. But if I do this, then everything connects again. So yeah, these are some of the very basic rules. You don't have to think about it too much, honestly. I found that you can really just click randomly at the screen and things will eventually just look good in this game. But yeah, these are the very basic rules that we'll get to play around with. So without further ado, I just want to show off some of my own projects before I move into a time-lapse where I try to build a city. And at the end of this video, we'll see how it all comes together. So this city was actually the first thing that I built in this game once I got it. And you can see some of the basic rules at play. We have some standalone houses here at the coastline with different colors. And then in the middle, this kind of Disneyland castle sort of structure made out of white walls. And you'll notice that all of these towers have spires on top of them because they're all standalone towers. There's one more rule that I'm going to have to point out, and that is, well, there's actually 2 rules, I guess. For one, if you build up, so above the sea level, but you do build sort of between buildings, or you build a wide enough flat space, the game does create more streets. So you can actually create higher street levels, and you can see the little staircases that even connect them over here. So that's something that you can play with. And if you have a space that is completely surrounded by buildings, the game creates a garden. So you can make city blocks with gardens and trees in the middle of them. So honestly, I really love all of the greenery that you get. It adds so much to the charming vibe of this game. And just with these very basic rules, you can build a lot of variety, honestly. Before I start the time lapse, there's one more thing I want to show off, which is kind of a different thing I did, I suppose. So on day 2 of my personal Townscaper adventures, I decided to try and build a modern city, and this is completely not something that you're supposed to do with the game. Well, if there's anything that you're supposed to do with it anyway, it kinda does clash with the style of the game, but considering, the context of what I'm trying to do, I think it worked out fairly acceptably. This little skyline was inspired by The Hague, especially because The Hague is very postmodernist architecture. The only thing I'll say is that the game does get a little bit laggy when you have this many squares in it, which I was a little bit surprised by given just how basic the game is, and it's a very small game too. But yeah, all things considered, it was actually still really fun to build this, and it does showcase another really interesting fact about the game, and that is that the grid of the game is very irregular. So if I turn on the grid view, you can see that you get all these very curvy grids everywhere that you can build on, and you don't have any control over this, but it is something that is really fun to play with, especially because these lines make it so that you have spaces where 5 lines come together, like for instance somewhere over here, but you also have spaces where 3 lines come together. And these different grid spaces also create different shapes of buildings, so it's another one of these variables that you may not have much control over, but it really helps to make the art style of this game a lot more appealing. But yeah, with that all said, I would like to move into the time lapse. So without further ado, let's get started. So my inspiration for this build is actually mostly the island kingdom of Corona from the movie Tangled. And I really hope that YouTube isn't going to demonetize me for name dropping Corona here. I swear I'm talking about the fictional island kingdom here, not the other thing that's going on that's apparently getting people demonetized. I don't know if that's still happening, but regardless, it's just a very unfortunate coincidence. I've never actually seen the movie Tangled, by the way. I just really like the aesthetic of it, and of Disney movies in general and Disney castles, because that's the sort of vibe that I'm getting from this game in general. In addition to, I would say, and I haven't seen anybody else talk about this, but I really want to bring it up because personally I've felt like this is really the case. This game reminds me so much of some of the Studio Ghibli movies, and I really don't know if I'm alone in this or not, but I love Ghibli movies, and especially some of the European themed ones really remind me of the art style of this game. I'm thinking about movies like Howl's Moving Castle, or especially on the intro scene of Howl's Moving Castle, or Porco Rosso, or especially Kiki's Delivery Service. Some of those aerial shots of the village there, which is actually inspired by Stockholm, really remind me of this game as well, which, I'll be honest, I'm totally here for it because I love Ghibli movies and just their whole aesthetic, so it's super cool. All the time playing this game, I'm just reminded of these kinds of movies. But yeah, for this build, I'm going for a somewhat larger island with a village on it, with hills gradually sloping toward the center, with a big castle in the center, in a sort of true Disney style fashion, having giant spires in the middle so that you create this sort of pyramid, this curved pyramid shape to the entire island, where you have the biggest towers in the center and they kind of taper off in height as you go toward the sides. It's not super original. I guess it's even a bit similar to what I've already built as my first build in this game, just on a bigger scale as I've gotten more used to everything that's available in the game. But it's just something that I really wanted to try and see how it works out. I'm also very curious to see how the time-lapse recording format works out here, because from what I've heard from some other people is that apparently the creator intends to add some sort of time-lapse mechanic into the game itself at some point. I'm not sure if or how that's going to happen at any point in the future, but for the time being, I just want to try my personal, time-lapse format of recording my gameplay and just speeding it up and getting back to it later. So that's what we're at right now, and honestly, I think the game works pretty well for just doing this. As far as it goes for YouTube videos anyway, the camera doesn't have to move around too much, you can keep it pretty still. And the advantage is also that I never really spend too much time looking at menus, and this is something that I love about the game in general, because obviously, you know, normally when you're playing with simulation games or creative games, you end up spending a lot of your time just on the UI itself, moving through different pieces and trying to select what you're trying to build with, which I think you don't really realize until you get thrown into a game like this, where you don't have to think about that at all. You just click on the screen, and something that just pops out to me right away is the fact that I'm always just constantly building stuff. Sometimes I'm deleting some stuff too, but more than when I would play City Skylines or Planet Coaster, for instance, I'm just always placing stuff, so things go a lot quicker, and it takes a lot less effort, and that's just something that makes this so much more therapeutic. On top of just, you know, it being very hard to make something that doesn't look good, honestly, in this game. It's just such a nice looking game, that also I personally struggle with the idea of how I'm ever going to make more videos on this game, because I don't think there's, you know, any particular kind of niche that I can carve out for myself. This video right here is really just to show off what the game is like, what it's capable of, and yeah, really just hammer on the fact that this is just a toy that is really therapeutic to play with, but it's kind of like doodling, I think. It's not really, you know, it's super creative exercise. It's really just this little relaxing toy to play with. But yeah, aside from that, it doesn't really fit my channel even, because it's completely different in nature from all the games that I usually play. But it's just too good and too fun not to make some kind of video on it. So here we are, I suppose. And at the end of the day, cities are my thing, even if they are medieval looking cities in a very, very simple bare bones city builder like this one. If we could consider this a city builder, which I think I would. I mean, it's an application where you build a city, so at its core definition, I think it applies. But yeah, it's something really interesting to think about. I don't know, it's just been keeping my mind occupied for the last couple of days anyway. But yeah, moving to the center of this whole island here, I finally built the castle, and this castle is just surrounded by big walls with the sort of light grey texture, the light grey brownish texture, I'd say, and in the middle we have this big white hall. I tried to model this after Neuschwanstein, actually, a little bit, which is a castle in the south of Germany, which also was the inspiration for the original Disneyland castle. So there's this one big hall in the center with a couple of towers around it, but it's not just a mess of random spires. It really has some bulk to it as well, which I think works out a lot better than just having a bunch of towers randomly next to each other. So I'm pretty happy with how the castle turned out. It's also a little bit Game of Thronesy. I did look at some old pictures of the Red Keep and things like this in Game of Thrones, just to get an idea for, you know, how the island could be shaped out in general. So that was part of the inspiration as well. But aside from that, I'm just filling in some of the foothills here with some more houses, and that is basically it. I added one more island over here, and I'm going to add another island on the other side of the main island as well, just to add something to the sides, but that's really just about it. And I also have to say, with the size of this whole build, I'm almost running out of space. Like on this side, I'm actually running into the world border, and I'm also running into the world border almost on the other side. Space is very limited in this game, and you can't build huge sprawling metropolises, so that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, with that said, let's take a quick look at how the final product turns out. Alright, so this is the result of about 2 hours of work. So all things considered, you can build some pretty cool stuff in a very short amount of time. But of course, I also think this is not really a game where the final product is the focus. It's more so just fun to build stuff. But yeah, I at least want to showcase it a little bit. And I do like how the central castle does have a bit of a body to it. I figured out that even though if you put roofs together, it normally creates a flat surface like this. One way to get around that is to intersect it with higher sections of roof, like over here. So I managed to get a pointy roof on top of this whole castle section bit here, just by having the tower kind of intersected and this thing as well. So that's something to keep in mind. There are always ways that you can like sort of game the system. The creator actually tweeted something today. There are nearly 500 different sort of puzzle pieces that make up all of the building blocks of this game. And the AI just kind of has to figure out what kind of puzzle pieces to get together depending on which building blocks you're putting together. But it sometimes makes some really cool combinations. So for instance, I made these little gateways. Just by putting some blocks together, it automatically makes these sloped roofs going to the middle here. And then you just have this small gable up front. So obviously, I don't know all of the combinations of what building blocks turn into when you put them together yet. But clearly, there's actually been some thought put into how building blocks go together and what you're trying to build. And the game really adjusts for a lot. One of my favorite examples is actually the entrance gate over here, which is at the sort of make-believe harbor section with a bunch of pigeons on the roof. Where you could tell that on the bottom we have these arches, and it goes from iron pillars into the stone arches for this building piece here. And then because there's a separate building block which actually is kind of unconnected to any other building blocks, but it does have building blocks to the left and the right underneath it, it automatically creates an arch over here as well. And then of course we have the spires on the side. So even though you only have one building block and you just kind of click everywhere, you really get a large variety of shapes. And that is not even to mention how the grid affects the shape of things as well. So for instance, on the side here, and oh god, the camera is actually being a bit difficult with me here because the world border is here. But on the side here, we have a very big grid space making this spire and a very small one making this spire. So you definitely get a lot of variety that way as well. But even with that, and with the very uneven grid, which is curvy at times, you also still have a lot of control over how things look. So altogether, I think it's really well balanced between, you know, giving the player control over how things look and taking the control away from you to figure out how to make things look as good as possible. I think the game strikes a really good balance. And honestly, I would personally recommend this game if you're interested in city building or creative games or the kind of doodling game that this is. Of course, if you're interested in actual gameplay, I wouldn't recommend it. This is really all there is to it. It's a very simple game, at least at the moment. It's still in early access, of course, so that might also be a reason why you want to wait with purchasing this game, even if you're interested in it. But I think for me, my personal conclusion is that this little toy, if you will, it doesn't do much, but what it does really well. And for what it is, which is essentially just a glorified doodling tool, it's really great. The sound design is very satisfying. The way that everything comes together and how the game figures out what to turn buildings into is very satisfying. And the art style is just really charming. The colors of it all, it just works really well together. And I think the main thing is that with some creative games, it can be hard sometimes to make something that you're happy with. Sometimes you're just looking at what you're building, being very disappointed by it, and it's just demotivating. This game just makes it so easy to make nice looking things. And sure, whatever you're building doesn't have to look like this. It can be completely different as well anyway. But so far, I've just noticed that I can honestly just put down random stuff and not really think about it too much and still look back at it and think, that's pretty neat. And for that, I have to give this game props. So that's basically my conclusion. I really like it so far. The game has a really great foundation, and I'm very curious to see where it'll go in the future. If you're already intrigued by this and you like the kind of doodling tool, I would highly recommend it. Otherwise, wait for the future and see what else gets added to this, if anything. And I have to give a final shout out to Jazz and Maddie from City Skylines who let me know about this game's release as soon as it did. And because my friend Bob tweeted about this and got likes for it, I need to say, don't forget to like and subscribe and click that bell to become part of the notification squad. I've never done calls to action. It just feels strange. I feel like a weird person doing this, but I guess I have to do it now. Anyway, this one's for you, Bob, I guess. I'll see you guys in the next game, or perhaps in the future in another Townscaper video. Take care, stay safe, and hope you have a good day.